Hi everyone. I'm in the Bearing book. This next section that the Bearing book is covering is Acts chapter 17, verses 4 to 9. And we'll read that from the New World Translation, the Silver Sword edition. Paul is in the synagogue in Thessalonica. So starting at verse 4, some of them became believers and associated themselves with Paul and Silas, and so did a great multitude of the Greeks who worshipped God, along with quite a few of the principal women. But the Jews, getting jealous, gathered together some wicked men who were loitering at the marketplace and formed a mob, and proceeded to throw the city into an uproar. They assaulted the house of Jason, and were seeking to have Paul and Silas brought out to the mob. When they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers to the city rulers, crying out, "These men who have overturned the inhabited earth are present here also, and Jason has received them as his guests. All these men act in opposition to the decrees of Caesar, saying there is another king, Jesus." When they heard these things, the crowd and the city rulers were alarmed, and after taking sufficient security from Jason and the others, they let them go. I only wanted to highlight a couple of paragraphs in the Bearing book, so I'll read paragraph 11 and 14. 11 says, "A mob is an ugly thing. It rushes with the fury of a swollen river, violent and uncontrolled. This was the weapon that the Jews employed to try to rid themselves of Paul and Silas. Then, after the Jews had thrown the city into an uproar, they tried to convince the rulers that the charges were weighty. The first charge was that Paul and his fellow kingdom proclaimers had overturned the inhabited earth, though Paul and his companions had not caused the uproar in Thessalonica. The second charge was far more serious. The Jews argued that the missionaries proclaimed another king, Jesus, thereby violating the decrees of the emperor." So the paragraph 14 that I want to read is their application to this. They say, "In modern times, the clergy of Christendom have often incited mobs against Jehovah's Witnesses. With cries of sedition and treason, they have manipulated rulers to act against the witnesses. Like those first-century persecutors, modern-day opposers are driven by jealousy. At any rate, true Christians do not court trouble. We avoid confrontations with such angry, unreasonable people whenever possible, seeking rather to continue our work in peace, perhaps returning later when things have calmed down." So, I have a couple of questions just from that paragraph. In modern times, they're obviously talking about the times of Jehovah's Witnesses as a group of people in an organization, if you like, Jehovah's Witnesses. So mobs against them. The fact that they mentioned sedition and treason made me immediately think of the Finnish Mystery time, when some were imprisoned, which is often referred to without knowing what is in the Finnish Mystery by most Jehovah's Witnesses, that caused them to be given that sedition argument, or the treason, accusation against them, was partly because of the way the Finnish Mystery was written. Later on, they edit the book, and then they abandon the book altogether. The other thing about them saying is often. I would like more accounts of where this often is. How often is often? So I know in some other countries there's been violent persecution against Jehovah's Witnesses. Sometimes, though, these confrontations that happen are because of the witnesses. The idea that they avoid confrontations, I don't think that's quite accurate. There's a lack of consistency in their policies, for one thing. So Ray Franz talks about two incidents. He talks about the Malawi and Mexican brothers. In one case, the brothers are allowed even to bribe officials. In the other case, they are not allowed to have a political card, even though there's only one party. They're not allowed to carry the card, and they get persecuted very violently. The other thing is they make a big promotion of the sister Nancy Ewan, who was imprisoned for more than 20 years because she would not stop going door to door in preaching in China. And yet there were other witnesses there who didn't go to prison. Why was that? That's not really talked about in the account about her life. Here she is the mother of several children, and she is willing to go to prison because she will not stop going door to door, even though there isn't a ban on preaching, just not door to door. So is that courting a confrontation? I guess that's for you to decide, but to me, there's not a consistency in the organization about their policies, and sometimes I think I would call them having a persecution complex, because when you're persecuted, that's almost a proof that you're in the right when you're a witness. So sometimes I think they do court persecution so that they can feel they're in the right. So those were my points there. But also the mob is an ugly thing. I would like to ask, who is the mob in the case of the way people who leave the organization are treated? People who leave, who are called so-called apostates, how are they treated? Who is the mob against them? You can't say that they're a mob, but the apostates, the so-called apostates, are a mob. But they are often talked about in the organization, both in publications and in public speeches, talks by the organization. And I would say they characterize a mob just because of the way in which they speak of these people. So I just wrote a few things down here. JW.org paints all who leave the organization, the witnesses, with the same brush. No one is ever said to leave because they honestly disagreed with the organization. No one can leave with integrity. They cannot leave because they love truth and wish to uphold it. They cannot leave for theological and conscientious reasons because they have issues with the actual teachings of the Watchtower. It's always painted as if they had weak faith, love the world, are materialistic, or immoral. Who is the mob then? Who slanders and demonizes, vilifies all so-called apostates? Who tries to rid Jehovah's Witnesses from contact with those who leave the organization? Who silences their voices? with false charges frequently. When we left, and I would say for knowing too much, they disfellowshipped us, and we were effectively silenced from dialogue, even with my own family, and certainly with other Jehovah's Witnesses. And I did feel voiceless and unheard. I think I myself thank God for the YouTube, the opportunity that it provides for my voice to be heard and for other voices to be heard. I believe God opened this door and that He has allowed thousands to hear us and others who've left the organization. The majority of our viewers have been very grateful for our doing this channel, and we are grateful for the opportunity to talk to so many and to help many. Just a sample, I wanted to close with a sample of the organization's what I would call mob technique. The questions from the readers in the Watchtower of 1983, the January 1st issue, page 31, said, "If someone is disfellowshipped, he must at the time have had a truly bad heart and or been determined to pursue a God-dishonoring course." So they can read hearts here. And then later the article said, "This should help Christian relatives and others to have a God's view of a disfellowshipped person." So you hear about somebody being disfellowshipped and you assume these things, that they have bad hearts and that they want to pursue God-dishonoring activity or life course. And it's just not true. So to me, to paint everyone with the same brush and then to have that planted in people's head, and I know when I was a witness, I thought you had to do something really terrible and to be unrepentant to be disfellowshipped. And then I'm disfellowshipped for knowing the truth about the history of the organization, and because I'm asking questions about it, I'm disfellowshipped. Did I have a bad heart? I'd like to ask the brothers who were involved in the congregation at the time we were disfellowshipped. Did they see us as being bad people, wanting to do immoral things? I don't think they would be able to say that. So for one thing, I would ask you to pray for these brothers. There were two brothers named Don. There was, okay, now I'm trying to think of their names, and I can't remember them, but Seppo was the name of one of them. So pray for those brothers. I'm always hopeful that people who were in the organization rethink these things and start to look at it. The last part that they say in this particular questions for the readers was, "Human emotions and attachments can have powerful effect, making it difficult for people to act in accord with the disfellowshipping decree." So this is not something that you can choose to do or not do, which is kind of what they're claiming now, but it's a decree. It was the way you were told you had to treat disfellowshipped people. It wasn't a matter of your own conscience and decision, as they try and put it now. Then they reference in this one Numbers chapter 18, which is about Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, who were, the earth opened up and swallowed them. So this is how you're supposed to be viewing people who are disfellowshipped. They end with, "Not the sort of person we want to be around." I'm going to link to a video called How often do the words apostasy, disfellowship, shun, or expel occur in the New Testament? And a second video, why Jehovah's Witnesses disfellowshipped us. 8 issues, where I read from the letter we sent to the organization. And it's a series, so you can just follow the links at the end. Thank you for listening.